Alice Gerdeman. I'm a Sister of Divine Providence, and our provincial house is 12.5 miles down the river from what would have been the Zimmer nuclear power plant. At the time that I got involved, I was the principal of a small Catholic school in Newport, Kentucky, and we were about 15 miles away from the Zimmer power plant. We saw one of the other teachers, Sister Dolores, and we read the newspaper, the Campbell County Reporter, and it had little notice that there was CG&E was going to be having a hearing or an explanation of what was happening there. And we went to figure out what this explanation was going to be. We already had seen a belt buckle come into the school from with one of the kids, so we knew something was going on there. We went and listened, and I met Don and Mary Reeder, who were there, and raising an objection to just about every third statement that was being said by CG&E, and they seemed to have some knowledge behind it. They were both teachers in the Campbell County school system, in the high school there. We met up with them, and little by little, we became Zach. Somewhere along the line, exactly how that happened, I don't know. We were never a huge group. Don and Mary were the official representatives of Mentor, Kentucky, with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, or whatever its name was at that point. Don would get rather upset with some of the lying that he saw, and he had a major heart issue. And then I took his place. So I was representing this town. I didn't live in it, but it was down the road from us. And I believe at that point there were like 89 people in Mentor, Kentucky. It was clearly a small place. I mean, not very. In fact, at one of the hearings, when somebody asked me how many people are there, and I said, well, really, I don't know. I haven't heard of any funerals, but there is one woman who is going to have a baby any day now, and so it could have gone up. That's how close it was. We did things with the people of Mentor, like Mary and I. We had very simple flyers, and we spent some Sunday mornings just going house to house, which was doable in that area. There was a whole area around it, this little enclave, and then there was a lot of area around it because people didn't understand or believed what was probably not true. And it was through that method that we began to get very interested in getting it stopped. At our provincial house, we had a nursing home and we had a Montessori school. And there were several elementary schools just down the road. They were all small. At one point, when we hooked up, Zach, Z-A-C-K, never was really very big. We hooked up with Zach on the Ohio side so that we would know more what was going on, and we would be able to collaborate together. And we knew we needed to have a lawyer. And so we asked Deborah Webb, who was she was only out of law school a couple of years, and she lived down just close by, and she had a couple little kids. And I remember at one of the hearings, she came running in late, and I was standing next to Andy up there waiting for her to come in as she was going to represent us. And she came in, handed me her car keys, said, "I'm double parked. Get somebody to park my car for me." And the judge said, or the hearing person said, "Ma'am, and she said, well, I'm sorry I'm late, Your Honor, I'm very sorry I'm late. But you see, a bus slipped off the road right on the curb near our house, and so I had a whole house full of kids while they got the bus back on the road," which was really good for a person to have said at a hearing on the way that you were going to evacuate to the area. So there were things like that worked out really well. And she was very young, and she did all this work, and my job basically was to that night at the convent to run off the briefs none of which were brief. I assumed they would be long, but some of these were masterpieces, and tried to make sure in a couple of copies not to get them mixed up. Because I am a religious, I think that did something for credibility, at least in the Northern Kentucky area. So when Vicki was on we were at the TV station doing this little public service announcement, it was nice to have somebody who had SR, sister in front, and then principal of a school behind. It would give you some credibility to say, listen, at least to these people. And a lot of people did come and ask questions. When we went to Washington and went to the hearing in the Congress, we also visited and lobbied, and Gene Snyder was our representative. Now, I went in to see Gene Snyder. He was very nice. It was right after lunch, and he gave me a dissertation on the value of sardines as a luncheon menu, and then told me that he was on the Wildlife and Fisheries Committee, and that's why he was telling me this. And I knew he was trying to make sure he didn't have to answer any questions. And that's a surefire way to do it. And I told him, thank you, but I have questions. I was principal of a school. I can do that. It's a little talent you get after a little while. It was very interesting after we got back. I don't know, a week or so later, two men came up to our convent. Now, we're in Melbourne, Kentucky, and our convent was up on a hill along Route 8. This is not a well-traveled route. But these two men came by and came to the door and asked to speak to me. And so we were sitting there talking, and they said, we were just passing by. And we remembered that somebody told us that some of the sisters were a little concerned about the power plant, so we thought we'd come and talk to you. Now, nobody comes up our driveway just because they're feeling that we're a little, concerned. And they pointed out all the values, and particularly pointed out that we were very wrong when we contended that we would have to pay for that power plant. There was no way that could happen. Because they just said it wasn't going to happen. And so I went and got our power bill, which, if you have a couple of big buildings, you have a fairly substantial bill. And on the bottom, it said capital improvements. And I said, I don't know, but when we read this, we seem to assume that a power plant that costs maybe millions of dollars might be a capital expense. If it isn't, then we don't understand that. And one of them looked at us and said, well, I know you're wrong, and we'll get back to you. That was interesting. I wrote that down in my calendar, and we had a good laugh. I don't know how, after the power plant even had stopped, there was a hearing so that to raise the rates. And I thought, why? And one of the things was Zimmer. And so I went to the hearing and got my name on the list and told the story that these people came, and it told me specifically that was not going to be the case. And then they called for a recess and left. So you begin to think that people are paying attention to the small voices when you get that kind of a reaction. And that was the thing that we did. We could tell a story, and the people that we were representing, they were treated like we were idiots, the whole group of us. I remember at the hearing, Deborah at one point was talking about the evacuation routes, and that they didn't seem to understand this was hilly country with people on little farms going down roads and small roads, etc. And she had as one of the witnesses the man who did road maintenance. Not a highly educated academic man, but a smart guy who knew about the roads of that area, which is better than an academic degree some days. And the I don't know if it was the CG&E or if it was the other company, whoever the person was that was talking to him, they said very condescendingly, now, on these roads, what would be the problem? And he said, they're narrow and you can't pass, cars can't just pass. And they said, well, nobody is going to go toward the power plant. And they said, yes, they are. Grandma lives down that road, and the kids might be home. So yes, they would go that way. So the question is, can cars pass on these little roads quickly? And they said, what about a regular car, a sedan? He said, depends on what they are. They might be able to get through, but they'd have to slow down. Someone would have to get off the road. And then they said, well, what about a Volkswagen, a little bug? And he said, yep. He said, I think that would be possible. And then he said, about a motorcycle. He said, yeah, motorcycles, they could do it too. He said, and don't ask me about bicycles, because the truth is bicycles could do it too, because it's hilly, but they could do it. But none of them people have any of that stuff. They have got these big pickup trucks, and pickup trucks can't do it. And that's the thing that you need to know. And it was like, don't make fun of people who know what they're talking about. The other little point that I wanted to make was some of these men were intimidating, and that was their way to do it. We had Don Reeder and a couple of other men, when we had college students that came to hear the hearings, if one of the young women went out, either to leave or to go to the bathroom, they went and stood in the hallway, because there were people there who accosted them and said very nasty things and made some pretty rude suggestions. And while sitting up on the front with Andy and Deborah, and I was like, sometimes in the front row there, one of the men, especially when Deborah would get up to say something, he would whisper under his voice, just softly, honey, you don't know anything. This is not for you. You have no experience. But I'm sure that nobody could hear it because he would mumble it. But that's when it becomes handy to have been a principal. Because many of these people are basically cowards and they know they're wrong. And if somebody looks at them with that look that says you're caught, they shut up. So I spent time at the hearings just staring down bad boys. Well, no, that's about what was going on there. And that's a shame, because how do you get to the truth if that's what you have to do? And we did that with a meeting with some of the executives at CG&E too. We sort of took turns. When they wouldn't give us time to speak, we would just say, excuse me, but it's our turn to talk now. So you have to listen. So it was the little people that I think we need to commend, besides all of us who did it and had the support of people who had information, because they know a lot, and once they got geared up, they said it.